1929, an American trade magazine published a story that fooled the entire world for almost 100 years. It said a sailor on Marco Polo's ship met a woman in China making long strands of dough and brought the recipe home to Italy in 1295. It even gave the fictional sailor a name: spaghetti. There's just one problem. None of it happened. The whole story was invented by a pasta company to sell more macaroni to American shoppers. And it worked so well, it ended up in school textbooks and a Hollywood movie. But here's what almost nobody knows. The real story of pasta is stranger, older, and far more interesting than that fake one. It involves an earthquake, a 700-year-old will, a fruit Europeans thought could kill them, and a food that isn't really from one country at all. Stick around. By the end of this, you'll never look at a plate of spaghetti the same way again. In 2002, archaeologists in northwestern China were digging through the remains of a settlement called Lajia, destroyed almost instantly by a massive earthquake and flood. The disaster happened so fast it froze the settlement in place, like a snapshot 4,000 years ago. Buried deep in the rubble, the team found an overturned clay bowl. When they turned it over and brushed away the dirt, thin yellow strands sat curled at the bottom. Noodles, 4,000 years old. Scientists spent years testing the strands before publishing results in the journal Nature in 2005. The noodles were made from millet, a grain grown in northern China for at least 7,000 years, hand-pulled into long, thin strands. Someone in ancient China was making noodles like this 2,000 years before Rome was even founded. So case closed, right? China invented pasta, and somehow it traveled to Italy? Wait, it's actually way weirder than that. Here's the twist almost nobody expects. Most historians agree these ancient Chinese noodles and Italian pasta are completely unrelated inventions. China's ancient noodles were made from millet and soft wheat. Italian pasta, the kind that can dry on a rack, sit in a barrel for months, and survive a boiling pot without falling apart, needs a completely different grain: durum wheat. It's harder, denser, and packed with gluten, which is exactly what gives dried pasta its shape and chew. Soft wheat simply cannot do that, a food historian put it bluntly. China only had soft wheat back then, so they could not have created dried pasta. This is the exact mix-up that let the Marco Polo myth survive so long. Noodles and pasta look similar, long strands of cooked dough. But looking similar doesn't mean one came from the other. Think about bread. Think about beer. Different civilizations invent the same basic idea independently all the time. So if it wasn't China, who actually invented the pasta we know today? The answer is a group that almost never gets credit for this. Arab traders and travelers, crossing the deserts of North Africa and the Middle East. These journeys could take weeks. Fresh bread goes stale in days. Cooked grain rots in the heat. But dried strips of dough made from durum wheat and water could last for months, with no refrigeration at all. By the 9th century, Arab cooks had perfected exactly that: a dried strand of dough called itria that could be stored indefinitely and boiled whenever you needed a meal. A 9th century writer from what's now Iraq even described boiled dough strips that sound exactly like vermicelli. One of the earliest written mentions of something we'd recognize as pasta today. This is the real breakthrough. Not the noodle itself, the drying. That's what let pasta survive a journey, instead of just a dinner. And that dried pasta was about to conquer Europe through a doorway almost nobody expects. In the 9th century, Muslim forces from North Africa invaded and settled Sicily, the island sitting right at the crossroads of the Mediterranean. They brought durum wheat seeds, advanced irrigation, and their dried pasta, and Sicily's constant sun and coastal breeze turned out to be almost perfect for drying pasta outdoors. Within a few generations, the island became a major production hub, and here's the detail that really matters. The earliest clear written record of pasta production in all of Western Europe comes from an Arab geographer in 1154, describing a Sicilian town exporting huge amounts of pasta across the Mediterranean. That's more than 140 years before Marco Polo even left on his famous journey. Pasta was already a booming export business in Sicily before Marco Polo was old enough to sail anywhere. Here's the piece of evidence that really finishes the Marco Polo story off for good. In 1279, a Genoese soldier named Ponzio Bastone wrote his will. Among his listed possessions, alongside his clothing and furniture, was a basket of macaroni, valuable enough to leave to his heirs. That will was written while Marco Polo was still somewhere deep inside the Mongol Empire, years before he ever set foot back in Venice. Pasta wasn't just present in Italy before Marco Polo came home. It was ordinary enough to show up in someone's routine inheritance paperwork. So the sailor named Spaghetti, the woman in China, the whole romantic legend, completely made up, a century later, by a marketing department trying to sell more macaroni. The real story was always right there in the paperwork. It just wasn't as good of a sales pitch. Wait, it gets even bigger. Because pasta was still a minor food in Italy for centuries after this, until one city turned it into a national obsession, Naples, in the 1600s. Neapolitan engineers built a machine that mechanically pressed dough through bronze plates using a giant hand-cranked screw press. Before this, every strand of pasta was shaped by hand. Slow, expensive. This machine changed the economics overnight, letting an entire crowded city eat cheap, filling pasta for pennies a bowl. European visitors described Neapolitans eating pasta with their bare hands right in the street. Forks hadn't caught on yet. But even now, this dish still wasn't what you're picturing, because there was one ingredient still completely missing: no tomatoes. For centuries, pasta was dressed with just cheese, butter, or oil. The tomato arrived in Europe from the Americas in the 1500s, and Europeans were terrified of it. It's part of the nightshade family, related to plants that can genuinely kill you. For roughly 2 centuries, almost nobody actually cooked with it. Wealthy collectors grew it as a curiosity in ornamental gardens instead. It wasn't until 1790 that a published cookbook finally paired pasta with tomato sauce for the first time. Sit with that for a second. The dish billions of people consider the definition of Italian food has only existed in writing for about 235 years. The United States is older than spaghetti with red sauce. It wasn't a grand culinary plan. It was an accident of geography. A South American fruit landed in a port city that already had centuries of dried Arab wheat noodles sitting in every pantry. One of pasta's biggest early fans outside Italy was Thomas Jefferson. During the 1780s, Jefferson traveled through Italy and became genuinely obsessed with pasta production, sketching diagrams of the bronze extrusion machines in his personal journals. In 1789, he had a pasta machine shipped all the way to his estate in Virginia and served macaroni and cheese to guests at White House dinners. His handwritten pasta recipe still survives today in the Library of Congress. But Jefferson only planted a small seed. The real explosion came decades later, and it had nothing to do with the president's dinner party. Starting in the 1880s, millions of Italians, mostly from the poorest regions in the South, left home in search of a better life. They packed pasta into their suitcases and carried recipes in their memory. In neighborhoods like Little Italy in New York, they opened grocery stores and small restaurants that introduced pasta to millions of Americans for the first time. The exact same thing happened everywhere Italians settled. Argentina, Brazil, Australia, wherever they went, pasta went with them. And because it was Italian hands carrying it to every corner of the world, the food became permanently, unshakably Italian in everyone's eyes. The Chinese millet noodles, the Arab itria, the Sicilian workshops, all of it quietly buried under the sheer weight of Italian identity. So here's the truth behind that fake 1929 magazine story. Pasta is Italian in the same way the English language is English. Yes, it was shaped, perfected, and given its name there, but it's built on Chinese hands pulling millet dough 4,000 years ago, Arab traders drying wheat for desert crossings, Sicilian workshops scaling it up under Arab rule, and a South American fruit that arrived completely by accident. Nobody owns pasta. Everybody built it. If you want more hidden histories about the everyday foods you've never once questioned, that's exactly why Taste Roots exists. Subscribe, and next time you'll never look at your own plate of spaghetti the same way again.